Please welcome to the stage Tahira Rehmatullah.
I paid him a lot of money to say that.
Let's turn that mic on for her, right?
Yeah, is this on? Are we there?
There we
Cool.
go.
Thank you. Thank you guys for being here. The second day of a conference is always interesting because you can see people straggle in a little. You tell that people had fun last night, as I can tell by some of these empty chairs here. So thank you guys for coming this morning. As mentioned, I'm going to be talking a little bit about ancillary products. That's the other unsexy side of the cannabis industry, but in my opinion, one of the very important elements of the cannabis industry. To get a quick sense, I always like to know who's in the audience. Who here is in the cannabis industry, is already working in the cannabis industry? Please raise your hands. Got it. And of those who are in the industry, how many of you are on the ancillary side of the industry? All right, not that many. So maybe I'll tell you a little bit about it. So obviously, the cannabis, when you think about cannabis, it's the logical thing that you think of is the plant and consumption of that. But there's this whole other ecosystem of businesses that have to exist, particularly in countries like the US, where I'm based, where it's federally illegal, and you can't just use tools that are natural to everybody else. To tell you a little bit about me, so I'm based in New York. I work for a venture capital fund called Hyper Ventures. We started off with our first fund investing solely in ancillary businesses, so businesses that do not touch the plant. We felt that the infrastructure opportunity was very important and a way to continue to build the market in a safe, ethical, compliant, and transparent way. So to touch on a little bit on what does it mean to be an ancillary versus a plant touching. Obviously, plant touching, there are all of these fun business over here. So you have cultivation, dispensary, edibles. One thing not on there is like distribution. I guess it's kind of in that transport. But they're all the things that you logically think of. On the non-plant touching side, we have advertising, digital media, equipment, e-commerce, and particularly in markets where you cannot access the basic businesses that other industries can access, ancillary becomes very, very important. In the US in particular, this has really robustly developed because we live in an environment where it's still federally illegal, as ridiculous as that is. And that has shifted quite a bit over time, but we're still in this situation where you can't just use a product that is used for other industries like consumer packaged goods or fruits and vegetables and things like that. So we had to create our own. And even down to how you access banking, if you can access it at all, which is a big challenge. So from an investment perspective, it also seemed like a way to put capital to work in an industry that people were very interested in, but in somewhat of a safer way because it's not actually touching the federally illegal product. There's still some nuances there where it's not as clear as that, but it's allowed for investors to get involved in a way, in an element that they kind of understand a little bit more than simply cultivation. Not that it's simply cultivation, we all know that, but you know what I mean. So these are examples. These are kind of a smattering of my favorite companies. Some of them were invested in, a lot of them were not. I wish we were. But to give you a sense on all the different types of businesses that are involved in ancillary, and this is a very, very small subset of the types of businesses that are involved on the ancillary side. I'll take you through some of them just to give you a sense, because unless you're US-based and involved in the industry, you may not know a lot of these. But a lot of them are expanding globally, which is why I think they're really important. We have a company called Headset, which is a business intelligence platform. Several years ago, I worked in the industry to start a brand called Marley Natural. And at that time, there was really no product or service that could tell me on a daily basis what my sales were, what products were being sold, what was popular, who were my demographics. If I wanted to get that information, I had to call a dispensary, hope they answered, ask them for the information. They'd usually tell me they didn't have it. And they would send it to me over the course of time. I would get it over an email, maybe a text, if I got it at all. That's a crazy way to try to run a business, to try to make daily decisions based on the information on what's going on in the market. So what Headset does is plugs into point-of-sale systems at a variety of retail environments and gets you that real-time information. And it sounds pretty rudimentary, like this is normal in every other industry. But in cannabis, it wasn't. We've been operating kind of the dark, where you're taking information from an illicit market and trying to apply it to a now legal market. So Headset really was able to take that information and bring it to light. And there are a couple of other tools in the space as well. More recently, Headset announced a partnership with Nielsen, which is a massive organization that collects data. So you can see how that is moving forward and really growing in the industry, and they'll be expanding into other countries as well. We have businesses like CB2 Insights, which is taking traditional methods of gathering information from patients. You know, Cam talked a lot about taking patient information and believing the patients, but how do you capture that information? It can't all just be anecdotal, receiving it and trying to develop insights from that. So what CB2 does is try to take information in a much more medical way through various clinics and distill that information so we can develop real insights in the market, and not only just in the US or Canada, but broadly around the world. Simplify is an interesting product. So in the US in particular, also in Canada, and I'm sure this is kind of happening around the world, we have different layers of policy. It'd be amazing if we had one policy for everything and one way to report it, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. So what Simplify does is it allows companies to audit their own information, so they're reporting information properly to the governmental bodies that they're supposed to be reporting to, which it sounds like an easy task, but it's really not. There's so many layers of information that you have to gather. I mean, in some states, in some jurisdictions, you have to weigh the product from the start, from seed all the way through to final product, and it changes its weight, right? It changes its form. So how do you capture that information? A product like that allows you to do that. And then a lot of these E's, I'm sure everybody has heard of PACs, but all of these different companies have developed, and they don't actually work directly with the plant, so they're a safer investment, but also things that can span the globe in a pretty interesting way. And that's why I think that the ancillary businesses are what's going to really start connecting all of the markets that are around the world. You know, when we look at this map, it's pretty amazing to see where cannabis is now. This map a couple of years ago was pretty sparse. And now we look at all of the different regulations, both from adult use perspective and medical, that are moving all around the world. So with that, how do we keep everybody connected? Why do we want to keep everybody connected? Well, when you look at a business like Tilray or Aurora or Canopy that are in multiple countries around the world, how do they talk to each other? How do they know all the different layers of business that are happening? How do they know what their subsidiaries are doing? And how do you create that information to really be the same? It's a really difficult process. What we're seeing in the US alone right now with the various states that are legalized in various forms, we have these multi-state operators that are kind of in a land grab right now where they're buying all these different producers and cultivators and retailers in all different states, and they're all operating on different systems. Systems that don't talk to each other, systems that don't talk to the government, government systems that don't talk to each other. So this is where ancillary products and technology in particular can really start to bring the industry together. And I think it's important to be able to bring the industry together for the sole reason that that's how we're going to learn. That's how we're going to provide more information to ourselves to make better decisions as businesses and operators, to give better information to our patients all around the world, create better rules and doses and the types of products. And then from a pure adult use perspective, how do we make sure that we continue to make it safe? That we don't end up in a situation where, like cigarettes many years ago, nobody thought that there was an issue, and then you get 20 years down the road and you realize that they do all these horrible things to people. How do we track cannabis to make sure that we avoid those types of situations? And it's all through technology and ancillary businesses. A quick case study that I'd like to present to you is a business that I've been working on for the last year called MTech. We started this SPAC, which is a special purpose acquisition company, with the sole purpose of taking an ancillary cannabis business in the US public. What we were seeing at the end of 2017 was that a lot of money and investment capital was going into cultivation all around the country, in Canada, all around the world. But the market was largely ignoring ancillary businesses. And we, just being invested in it through Hyperventures, understood how critical it was to have these types of businesses funded and operating and having the ability to scale. So we started MTech, which is a shell company that you raise money for, you IPO it, and then we have a timeline to then go on and find an ancillary business that we'll take public. So we announced a couple months ago that we'll be merging with a company called MJ Freeway, which is one of the first seed-to-sale technology platforms that developed in the US that tracks cannabis from the point of that it's a seed all the way to sale. So just as the name implies, they named it very well. And what that does is allow businesses to be able to understand all along the supply chain what's happening to the product. Now, what's interesting about MJ Freeway and why we found it so appealing was that it's already in 11 countries. You wouldn't know that, but they're expanding into other countries, and they already have information that can talk to each other. So as they continue to grow and more systems in other countries continue to develop, there are already some systems that are able to exchange that information and understand what's happening in Colombia, what's happening in parts of Canada, what's happening in Spain, what products sell, what don't sell, what are the dosages. That type of information is going to continue to be very critical as the market continues to develop. We might find out in a couple of years that some products are essentially obsolete, and new products will continue to develop in the market. We also thought it was interesting that taking something that is technology to span the globe is something that you can move a lot faster, right? When you're developing hard assets, it's much more difficult to try to put those in place and get that information. But technology has the ability to do that. There's a lot of words, but I'll read it to you. One last point that I want to touch on, and something that I find very important, is the way that technology in particular, when we think about ancillary businesses, can have an effect when it comes to social impact. So this is an embarrassing chart, but I think it's an important one, that in the 1970s, starting when Nixon launched the war on drugs, the number of arrests in the US related drug offenses skyrocketed. I mean, for the US, which is a country that has less than 5% of the world's population, it has 20% of the world's incarcerated population. That's a stat that I'm embarrassed of, and it still exists today. So when we live in this time now where we have cannabis being legalized all around the world, but particularly in the US, where, and Cam touched on this right before me, we're disproportionately affecting populations of color. How do we use the new policies that have developed, new technologies, to actually help that population? It seems as if we've forgotten them. In this rush to kind of make money, to grow the population, how do we use these tools? And what we found is that actually technology can be the best source to do that. So recently, and what all these words are, is a case study in the city of San Francisco in California. The state of California, when they passed Prop 64, had an expungement language in there where people who had prior convictions could go in and petition to have their record expunged. But it was given no mechanism on how to go about it, do that. Now, if I had a record, which thankfully I don't, but if I did, I don't know if I would know where to begin or have the resources to go and start that process. It's lengthy, it's costly, and to think about the populations that are affected by that, most people probably don't have those resources. So what San Francisco did is they used the help of a company called Code for America, which is a nonprofit tech company that tries to make technology platforms to make governments more efficient. Now, I don't know where everybody is from, but I'm sure everybody can feel like their government could be a little bit more efficient, especially when it comes to the platforms that are utilized. And what Code for America did was create a pretty simple algorithm to comb all the records that were in San Francisco for certain classes of misdemeanors and felonies that now are actually considered legal in that state, and they were able to automatically submit the paperwork and have those expunged. So of all the records, they went back to 1975, and that number is a little inaccurate. It actually is about 9,300 cases that they were able to expunge all in one go, just by using that simple tool. So if we take cases like this and understand that there are these tools out there, and as we're legalizing around the world, we can also have an impact on the populations that were disproportionately affected by the war on drugs, by racism, by bureaucracy, and as we know, this is not just a US or Canadian issue. This has happened all around the world when it comes to cannabis. I think we all believe, or I would assume that we all believe, that cannabis can change the world, and quite frankly, it already is. I mean, it's changing the way that we innovate, it's changing the way that we operate, and it will continue to do that as we expand the market. my hope is that we not only look at how to cultivate, how to create great products, but how do we help patients, how do we help consumers, and how do we help those who came before us who were advocates and fought to legalize cannabis. And I think that these are the tools that we can utilize going forward, and I'd welcome any conversation after this to discuss more. As you can tell, I'm very happy and passionate about this topic, and I think that there's a lot more that we can do. Thank you so much.
Okay.